Hello, book lovers, and welcome to Book Talk Radio Club. My name is Claire Harris, and today I'm talking to multi-genre author Harry Milman. Harry is the author of Sawyer's The Final Flight, a sci-fi novel, A Death at Camp David, a political whodunit that won Best in Mysteries in Book Talk Radio Club's 2018 awards, and his most recently published book, Forensics, the Science Behind the Death of Famous People. Forensics is an analysis and description of how coroners determine the cause and manner of death. An investigation of 23 deaths of famous people was conducted based on a review of publicly available autopsy and toxicology reports, as well as published scientific and lay articles. We also touch on the second forensics book that will be coming soon, which is a mixture of the good, the bad and the ugly. Hello Harry, thank you for coming back to talk to me on Book Talk Radio Club.
Thank you very much for having me, Claire. I appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Harry, you published Forensics, the Science Behind the Death of Famous People just over a year ago, October of 2020. How's the book been received?
I'm very excited with the way it's been received, both in the United States as well as internationally. We sold right now at least 6,000 copies with 485 reviews in the UK alone. So it's very exciting, and it's been very well received, and it's a lot of encouragement towards my next book.
Fantastic. Let's talk about some of the famous people and their deaths that are discussed in the book. Starting with Carrie Fisher, also known as Princess Leia from Star Wars, and she'd been abusing cocaine and other pharmaceuticals for many years. So when it was announced that she died from sleep apnea, you were sceptical. Firstly, why were you sceptical? And secondly, what is sleep apnea?
Well, you hit on the point right there, because Carrie Fisher is known to have been a drug abuser. And so when I heard the coroner determined that she died from sleep apnea, I was skeptical because I expected her to have died from a drug overdose. And that wasn't the conclusion by the coroner. Sleep apnea, of course, as we all know, is where somebody, it's an affliction that somebody stops breathing for a few seconds, is able to be aroused, if you will, but it's intermittent stopping of breathing. And so I suppose that could be a problem. What happened with Carrie Fisher is that she had a medical emergency aboard the plane, and so 3 days later she died. So the assumption was that she died from sleep apnea.
A review of the medical examiner's report revealed that the Fisher family refused to give permission for an autopsy and toxicology tests to be done. Constrained by these limitations, the coroner labelled the manner of death undetermined. What do you think caused her death then, Harry?
So as I mentioned, she had a medical emergency aboard a plane, but she didn't actually die until about 3-4 days later in the hospital.
All right.
So the real question is what happened aboard the plane as opposed to why did she die?
Exactly. I was just going to ask you that.
Yeah. So aboard the plane, she basically she had this what they called a medical emergency, where she slumped over on the shoulder of her assistant, and she stopped breathing for a while. They had to give some medical emergency treatment. And of course, after she died 3 days later, they didn't do an autopsy. They didn't do any toxicology testing. They didn't have any objective results. So therefore, that's why the coroner labeled the manner of death undetermined. Now, you asked me what do I think caused her death, or at least what caused her medical emergency. I think, what they did find in her blood, which I discussed in the book, this is samples that were taken at the hospital, were various small doses, small amounts of different medications, including metabolites of cocaine and heroin and some other drugs. And so it's possible that the combination of these various drugs caused, her to collapse, if you will, on the plane. That's one possibility. Another possibility is she may have had a heart attack. Well, they ruled out a heart attack in the hospital. So the combination of these different drugs, along with her sleep apnea, together could
Hmm.
And if it was lengthy enough, maybe that's why she stopped breathing long enough that it affected her brain, and as a result, she died 3 days later.
You've investigated 23 deaths of famous people in your book, amongst them being Errol Flynn, Marilyn Monroe, Elvis Presley, Karen Carpenter, and Heath Ledger. So a mix of generations, ages, and genres. May I ask you why you chose these particular people?
Well, as you see, all these people, as well as the remaining of the 23 different people that I discussed in the book, they're all in the entertainment field. And one parameter was that I wanted to have access to the autopsy results, so at least a lot of information regarding their death, so that I can discuss it in the book.
Right.
And that's one reason why I selected these specific individuals. And then of course a lot of them are people that are well known, well liked, and some of my favorites. And so one thing and another, before you know it, I had a whole bunch of different people in the entertainment field.
Right.
And that's how I wound up with this set of group.
Let's talk about Marilyn Monroe, perhaps one of the most famous women in the world, and a death that had no end of conspiracy theories behind it. Some believe she was murdered by the President of the United States and his brother, the Attorney General, or possibly by the Mafia, or even by the CIA. Others thought her death was a suicide committed by a lonely and insecure woman who was unable to cope with the demands of the film industry. Still others wondered whether it was an unfortunate accident that had gone awry. It was a question you were determined to investigate and whose answer you hoped to put to rest once and for all. So what was your conclusion?
So my conclusion, after I reviewed all the autopsy, Marilyn Monroe's autopsy, all the records, and a lot of different articles, my conclusion was that she died from suicide. Unfortunately, part of the reason she died from as a result of a suicide because she has tried this once before, at least once, if not more than once before, where she took an overdose of sleeping pills. But in the past, she was rescued in time. This time, she succeeded, if you will. And if you read the book, you'll get more detail. But basically, they found a lot of drugs in her system that cause sedation and respiratory depression and death.
Shame. Such a shame. Heath Ledger, a wonderfully talented Australian actor, not even 30 years old, found unconscious in his bed by his housekeeper. A representative from the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner of the City of New York said, Mr. Heath Ledger died as a result of acute intoxication by the combined effects of oxycodone, I'll try and get these right, hydrocodone, diazepam, temazepam, alprazolam and doxylamine. I hope I said this right. That's a heck of a cocktail of drugs. I take it they're not lethal usually. For what are they described?
Yeah, so these drugs, each drug can be lethal in its own right if it's taken in large amounts. So, but when they're taken in therapeutic amounts, individually they can be fine. But when it's combined and they have the same pharmacological and toxicological effects, so when they're combined, their effect is additive, and therefore you can run into these various problems. So, for example, hydrocodone, diazepam, temazepam, or alprazolam, they're all tranquilizers and sedatives. So when you're taking a whole bunch of different sedatives, the combined effect now becomes toxic, very toxic. And in Heath Ledger's case, he's been taking these kind of drugs since he was a teenager, because he's always been having problems sleeping. And of course, at that time, he may have taken only one or two, but by now he's been taking several.
Yeah.
And so that's what happened. He took too many, and even though they were each at a therapeutic level, combined, they were toxic.
You say at the end of the chapter about Heath Ledger's death, and I quote, "It is tempting to speculate what might have been had Ledger lived, but it would be an exercise in futility. Extremely talented with an on-screen charisma, Ledger was serious about his craft. It all comes down to being willing to be taught," he said in a Vanity Fair interview on the set of The Patriot. "The day I stop having fun, I'll just walk away." Unfortunately, he never got the chance to see that day, and it's very sad. There seems to be some what people have labelled as a curse called the 27 Club. Brian Jones, Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, and Jim Morrison all died at the age of 27 between 1969 and 1971. At the time, the coincidence gave rise to some comment, but it was not until Kurt Cobain's 1994 death at age 27 that the idea of a 27 Club began to catch on in public perception. What's your opinion of this 27 Club, Harry?
So, as you mentioned, the 27 Club is all these individuals who died from primarily drug overdoses or some sort of combination of drugs, but they were all 27 years old. Which basically, and as we all know, 27-year-old, you're still basically a young person who was not very familiar with the toxicology and pharmacology of these various pharmaceuticals.
Yeah.
So they think if you take one, it's fine. If you take several, they're not aware that the toxicological effect is combined, and that's how they wind up, like for example, Heath Ledger, he took I think 5 different drugs, all had the same therapeutic effect, and they were taking it all as prescribed, but taking them all together, it got them into trouble, and that's something that they're not aware of at 27. So it just means that especially people in the entertainment field in that age group need to be more educated.
Absolutely. Talking of the 27 Club, let's discuss Amy Winehouse. Such a very talented singer, what a voice, but what a mess, mentally, physically and emotionally. Poor girl. A heavy drinker, Amy Winehouse was thought at first to have died from a drug overdose, but apparently she died from alcohol poisoning. What is alcohol poisoning? I mean, we all have a drink or 3 every now and then, but it must take a huge amount to kill you.
It does. So just as we all know, too much of a good thing is not good for you either. So, 1 or 2 glasses of alcohol may be fine, but if you're taking 8 or 10, and especially if you take too many and take them too quickly, the liver doesn't have a chance to metabolize it. So now the alcohol level in the blood increases to such proportions that it affects the brain, and then you can die from respiratory depression. And that's what happened with Amy Winehouse.
Whitney Houston, also a shocking death, although having said that, in the last few years before her death, she wasn't looking her normal, beautiful self. She was found in the bathroom, lying face down in the bathtub. It was known that she abused cocaine, and people speculated that alcohol must have contributed to Houston's death by making her so sedated that she slid under the water and drowned. However, there was a different explanation for how she died. What was that killed her then?
So, as you indicated, she died in a bathtub, in a hotel bathtub. So, the immediate cause of death was drowning. But what made her drown is the question. And so it's speculated it was alcohol, but in fact there was no alcohol in the system. So it wasn't alcohol. So now what we did find is that she had coronary atherosclerosis, which is the narrowing of the coronary arteries, and so she may have had a heart attack or some sort of a heart condition, that then affected her, and she slid under the water and drowned. But it was not alcohol, and there were again some drug metabolites in her system, but they were all at therapeutic levels, not sufficient to be considered a drug overdose. So it's we'll never know for sure. But the only thing we know is that she drowned. But what caused her to drown, most likely, is some sort of a heart issue.
Harry, you're a consulting pharmacologist and toxicologist. What are these specialities, and what do they actually involve?
So they're very similar, but they're quite different. So the similarity is that they both deal with absorption, distribution, and elimination and metabolism of pharmaceuticals or sometimes of chemicals in general. But the main thing is that pharmacology deals with the therapeutic levels of drugs. Toxicology deals with the overdoses, the high amount. So the toxic effects of drugs. And so I've had experience in both cases, and both in the therapeutic area as well as the toxicology area. And that's what I've been doing that since then.
So how did you get into these two fields? Was it something you decided you wanted to do early on in life?
Yeah, so if you had asked me back in high school, what do you want to do when you grow up, I would have told you I wanted to be an electrical engineer. I was good at math. I liked electricity. I thought it was going to be an electrical engineer.
Right.
But life takes me in mysterious ways, and one thing and another, I went up into biological sciences, did cancer research, toxicology, and somehow I got into writing books. But none of this was planned. But nevertheless, it's been a fun ride, if you will.
Tell me how the second book came about. It's a bit of a background, as it were.
Yeah, so my second book, as I mentioned, I have the first book, Forensics, the Science Behind the Deaths of Famous People. It's, it has a great readership. Everybody loves it. They all ask me, what are you going to write next? They want another sequel. As if it's so easy, mind you, to write another sequel. In the whole process takes me at least 2 to 2.5 years from the time I start writing to the time it's published. But I wanted another sequel, and so the question was, do I write a sequel, which is nonfiction, or do I go back to writing a fiction novel, which I already started, called Murder in the Taj Mahal? I decided to continue with another nonfiction, a sequel, and whereas the first one was called The Science Behind the Deaths of Famous People, this one will be The Science Behind the Deaths of Famous and Infamous People. So people seem to like that. It's a lot of fun researching it, and I'm about 85% finished. I'm going to have something like 36 different individuals in that book.
Well, let's touch briefly on that. You say it's the deaths of famous and infamous people, which you say is a mix of the good, the bad, and the ugly. Name a good and a bad and an ugly, and why have you chosen them in particular?
Yeah, so again, the overriding theme is the toxicology and the issues related to toxicology as opposed to, let's say, natural deaths. Although sometimes natural deaths can also be very interesting in their own right. So I have the book, just to give you an idea, I mentioned I'm going to have about 36 people involved, and I arranged it in chronological order of death, not date of birth, date of death.
Right.
And so the first one is going to be, for example, George Washington,
Okay.
first American president.
Mm-hmm.
The last one is going to be Naya Rivera, who is an actress in the TV show Glee.
Okay.
I don't know she drowned, if you recall. You may not recall, but that's why you got to read my book. But and in between, I'm going to have a combination of both of people in the entertainment field, as well as, for example, a mob boss. I'm going to have a mob boss. I'm going to have some various Charles Whitman. I don't know if they know it in the UK, but he was a fellow who was shooting people off. He was on top of a tower at the university in Arizona, and he shot people from the tower, and there are a number of reasons for that, which I'm discussing in the book. And then of course, and then there are others like Kurt Cobain, who mentioned his name earlier, Vince Foster, even George Harrison, who recently died, and others. So it's a combination of historical people, entertainment people, people who are not well thought of, if you will. Anthony Bourdain is going to be in the book. And the thing is that each one of these individuals has an interesting aspect to him. I don't mean life, I mean death. So for example, we all know George Harrison. Let's say he had a brain cancer and a throat cancer. So we'll be discussing that, how that came about, and how that affected him. And so that's basically it. Is that each individual that I selected is interesting in their own right, plus have a good
When do you expect to publish the second book, Forensics to the Science Behind the Deaths of Famous and Infamous People?
So I am approximately 85% finished writing. It's aside from the book itself, the contents itself. I'm also going to have at the back a formulary of all the drugs, as well as a glossary of all the medical terms, which will all be defined. So that'll be an interesting addition to the stories.
Yeah.
Which again, a lot of the readers enjoy.
Excuse me.
And but nevertheless, I'm about 85% finished, and I'm considering that's just the writing. After that, as we all know, there's the publication process, and so I'm hoping to get it out in time the following Christmas season.
I see you're already receiving wonderful reviews for Forensics, the Science Behind the Death of Famous People. In fact, well, I've got, as of today, 433 of them. How many did you say?
As of this morning, we got 486 reviews on Amazon UK.
That's amazing.
It's very exciting. I'm shooting for 500. Let's hope that my wife says it's going to happen within the next 10 days or so. So we'll see what happens.
Well, amongst them, we've got fascinating look at the science behind the deaths of famous people, written for laymen. And also, this book was such an enjoyable read. The way each chapter flows with a short history, medical findings and summary was so refreshing and intriguing. Harry, I noticed from your Facebook post that you're out and about once more carrying out book signings. If people wanted to come and purchase one of your signed books, is there anywhere that they can obtain a list of your upcoming appearances?
Yeah, so until now, COVID has restricted the face-to-face book signings.
Sure.
But now I'm in the United States. We have Barnes & Noble, and some of them are opening up, so they are inviting me. And, of course, I always sell out, so they keep inviting me back. And you can follow me on Facebook. I list everything on Facebook. I have my own page, Harry A. Milman. You can find me. I have several pages. Just send me a friend request, and then you can follow me and you can see all my events. Right now, they're all in the United States. As soon as COVID is up, we'll do one in England.
Hooray! So finally, I have to ask you, where can Book Talk Radio Club listeners purchase Forensics, the Science Behind the Death of Famous People, apart from your in-person book signings?
Yeah, so the book is both the Forensics as well as my earlier two books, The Death of Camp David and So You, The Final Fight. All three books are listed, of course, on Amazon, Amazon.com. And the Forensics book is also listed on Forensics famouspeople.com. Forensics with an S, forensicsfamouspeople.com.
Wonderful. All right, well, thank you, Harry. That was really interesting. Please come back on Book Talk Radio Club soon. I'd love to chat and hear more. In the meantime, good luck for the future, and thank you, everyone, for listening to Book Talk Radio Club. Lovely as always to speak to you, Harry.
Likewise here. Thank you so much.
All right, thanks. Bye now.